Welcome to the Growth Minded Accountant podcast, where our experts will share best practices on running your firm in the digital age. This podcast is brought to you by CountingWorks Pro. Let's get started.
Welcome back to another episode of the Growth Minded Accountant podcast. My name is Lee Reams. I'm the founder and CEO of CountingWorks, and I'm joined today with our Chief Visibility Officer, Rebecca Barton. Rebecca, if you could say hello.
Yes, hello everyone. This should be a fun one.
Yeah, and we're kind of expanding on how more disruption. Of course, we're going to talk about disruption, but we're going to talk a little bit more how the new tax and accounting marketing funnel has actually no funnel. So one of the things I see is the biggest marketing risk today isn't that someone visits your website and doesn't fill out your form. I think the bigger risk is someone asks AI for the perfect tax and accounting firm. AI does the research, and then unfortunately, another firm makes the shortlist, right? And you lose a client you never even knew existed. So here today on the Growth Minded Account, we're going to dive into this subject. And I want to challenge something that almost every marketer, including us, has been taught in the last 20 years. And we're going to talk about the marketing funnel. If you're a HubSpot user or ever heard of HubSpot, they kind of define the standard, I guess, which is now very outdated. But it kind of went through, the marketing funnel was something like awareness, consideration, decision. You get someone's attention, you educate them, you nurture them, and you build trust over time, right? And then eventually they become a lead, right? Then the sales team takes over and they basically, use their playbook to help turn that prospect into a closed deal. So something has fundamentally changed, and it's changed very quickly. So the new tax and accounting marketing funnel actually has no funnel. And that doesn't mean people suddenly stop needing education. And that doesn't mean that trust still doesn't matter. But buyers, your prospects, will still discover their problems, and they'll research their solutions and they'll compare options and make decisions. But what is changing is the speed and sequence of that process. And I'm sure anyone who uses a tool like ChatGPT has already experienced that, whether they planned a trip, they were, looking for a new restaurant, who knows, right? So, what used to take, let's say, 6 Google searches and maybe 4 or 5 website visits, and then 3 nurture emails that your system was popping out, your CRM, and then a downloadable guide from a landing page that you made, and maybe 2 weeks of thinking can increasingly happen inside one AI conversation. So one conversation with ChatGPT can actually do all of that funnel in a very truncated time. So the funnel hasn't disappeared, it's been compressed by technology. So AI hasn't eliminated the buyer journey in any way. Let's just say it's put the buyer journey on fast forward. So as usual, I'd like to break these down into sections. And I'm going to talk about a little bit of the old funnel at this point. And I'm going to go back 10, 15 years. Rebecca will be nodding her head, on a lot of what we're talking about, because this is what she was trained on, right? So imagine I own a construction company. We're doing, let's say, $4 million in revenue. Business is good, but I'm frustrated because my accountant prepares my taxes and I don't feel like I'm getting much proactive advice, right? So just pure compliance work. And the problem is I don't necessarily know what I should be getting, right? So I go to Google, how can a business owner reduce their taxes? And I read something, and then I search, what is tax planning versus tax prep, for example? That would be a good search term. Now I'm realizing there might be a different type of a relationship available. It's like that aha moment for your current client, right? So then, what does a tax advisor do? And then, okay, how much does tax advisory cost? And each element, each question is educating the prospect, right? And eventually, hey, can you list some tax advisors near me? And now I open these 4 websites, or maybe the top 3, which is most people used to do with the blue links, right? And then I might read a bio page. I might see reviews or case studies, types of firms they work with. I may even, give my information to download a guide. And now the firm has my email address. So guess what happens, right? And this is the old funnel. A few days later after that, another email comes, right? And I start receiving, I'm being nurtured, I'm being followed up on. So eventually somebody gets me to schedule a consultation. This is a long period of time, right? And that was the old funnel. So marketers became really good at engineering this, right? We had a whole industry with landing pages, for example. And, and there was certain ways that things would be set up, and you would engineer it. You might have a blog at the top of the funnel, right? So I'm going to educate. And then you might even write blog articles that were more for awareness of a problem versus consideration versus making a decision, right? And then somewhere in between, you have a lead magnet. And, there might be a case study that's kind of that social proof farther down. So, and then you throw out an email nurture, then you retarget them on social media, right? And then at some point, you grade that lead high enough, or your HubSpot product or whatever, Salesforce, and then there's a sales handoff. And there was a reason that worked, because information was fragmented at that time. So the buyer needed us to assemble the answer and put them through a process where they gain trust, awareness, and then the ability or kind of the need to act, right? So that has kind of changed now, Rebecca, with AI. So AI now basically is an R&D department for every single prospect of yours. So kind of explain what that means and how that has changed that example with that construction company I just gave, and the way the process might work today.
Yeah, so it absolutely has changed everything. I'm laughing because I remember doing everything you just talked about, right? Like 10 years ago, we were using ClickFunnels and we were creating like all of these entire funnels for specific offers, for specific, awareness about a specific issue. And that is shifted entirely. So buyers no longer necessarily need a firm or a company's funnel to assemble the answer they need. They have an AI assistant. Everyone has an AI assistant. Back even 10 or 15 years ago, that sounded like a pipe dream. I think of Jarvis and Iron Man, and only the Tony Starks of the world could afford an AI assistant to help them, right? Now we're
an anecdote there. Stark's house was on Point Doom, where I used to live in Malibu.
That is actually very, very cool. I love that. I didn't know that. I love Iron Man, so that's a great fact.
There you go. You now are enlightened.
So instead of performing 6 searches over several days or even weeks, or maybe completely falling out of the funnel because it's just taking so long they lose interest, now a person can go to ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever their AI assistant of choice is and say, hey, I own a construction company in Southern California doing about $4 million in revenue. My accountant prepares my taxes but doesn't do much planning. Am I missing opportunities? What would a proactive tax advisor do differently? And what should that relationship cost? Then at the end, they might add something like, how do I find a good local firm that works with businesses like mine? That's one prompt. That's one conversation. So within that entire conversation, I think truncated was a great word for it, Lee. We've really compressed everything down to where the awareness is, maybe my current relationship isn't enough or isn't what I'm looking for. Education, okay, I understand the difference between compliance and planning. The solution awareness is that they now understand they need proactive advisory services, not just tax preparation. The consideration, what should the relationship include? How should that professional relationship function? Vendor research, who works with companies like mine? Comparison, which firm looks like the best fit? Due diligence, what do their reviews, what does their website say? And that's the same exact psychological journey we were previously taking people on over days or even weeks, sometimes a month. But now it happens within 3 or 4 minutes. It's wild to actually see this change. But the funnel has not changed in regard to how people think. People are still functioning the same way psychologically. The entire process has just been squished down from taking a month to taking a few minutes. But all of that awareness, all of that research, all of that due diligence is now happening within a single AI conversation.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple ways to go with this. And one of the things that jumps out at me right away is just because this now happens inside ChatGPT doesn't mean all that educational content, those social signs, those proof, those trust building signals that you were creating in the old funnel, it doesn't mean that content is no longer usable. It's just now usable by a tool like ChatGPT. And the prospect actually is now self-nurturing themselves. But if you have not properly seeded ChatGPT, then your talking points, maybe your brand is not mentioned during this conversation. And that's the opportunity and obviously the risk of doing nothing. So I think it's really important to understand this. So think about how a traditional nurture works. Someone downloaded the guide, right? So day 1, here are 3 things business owners should know. Day 3, here's why proactive planning matters. Day 6, here's my client success story at a firm that works in the same vertical you do, right? Day 10, ready to schedule a consultation. You control the pace at that point. And this is more speaking to higher end marketers. A lot of accountants just ignored a lot of this stuff, or you hired someone like us to do it, right? But what's happened now is AI has broken that. But more importantly, it makes it much easier for a small, medium-sized tax and accounting firm to be able to apply the same sophisticated funnel techniques into the new ecosystem, right? So the prospect now doesn't need to wait to Thursday for my email number 3, right? They could just ask ChatGPT, hey, give me an example, or what does that look like for a construction company? Or what strategies should I be asking my advisor about, right? What should this cost? That's why all this context and transparency is so important. So, what questions should I ask before hiring one? Hey, can you compare? And then it gave a final list and it said, hey, based on your construction firm needs, here are 3 accounting companies that work with construction firms in San Diego. And then it will list them. And then the prospect might say, can you compare these firms, right? And they can create their own nurture sequence in real time. So what happens here is the buyer, your prospect, now controls the pace, right? Not us, not the marketer, but you do control the content, and you can control kind of what happens here. So let's talk about how the evolution and where the opportunities and why this is so powerful. Like, we have seen incredible results for our tax and accounting firms, but they took a leap. They broke away from the old days. They broke away from cookie cutter websites. They started actually creating, their own narratives, right? They actually have a brand. I mean, some of the websites and the narratives and the content that we've been creating lately are blowing me away. They're like ad agency stories, right? They're like movie, productions at this point. But why is that so important, and how has things evolved so much in this funnel? And kind of the idea is, how can we get this flywheel going where you are the recommended professional in whatever vertical or service you're looking to offer?
So you can see the evolution, Lee, and how we've marketed and how things have changed. For years, we talked about the funnel. It was a straight down. We had top of the funnel, bottom of the funnel, middle of the funnel. It was very, very clear which piece of media or which piece of content belonged in which part of the funnel. Now, not now, but a bit ago, HubSpot popularized the idea of the flywheel. Customers were not the end point of the journey. They then became referral engines. They created advocacy for your brand. They created momentum for you, whether it was online or offline. Now, even more recently, HubSpot, which is obviously major within the marketing world, has been talking about loop marketing. So the idea here is that basically the buyer journey is becoming less and less linear. So people move between traditional search, AI, social media, listening to podcasts, talking to people in their real lives, then looking at reviews, referrals, communities online, could be forums, could be Facebook groups, things like that, and traditional websites. Firms do not control that sequence. So people are connected now all the time. And we're all kind of constantly thinking about things, right? Like, I don't even know how many times a day I'm looking something up just because it occurs to me, or I need to know it for work, or my kids ask a question, or whatever it is. But people are searching various platforms now. And this is where what Lee was saying is so important. The content you have out there, no matter where it is helping to build your brand. It is now becoming your identity online. And all of these systems that people are now using to search, and that funnel that has now kind of become a loop, it's using all of that information about you that's on the internet to decide who you are, what you do, what pain points you solve, and who you work with. So the better job you do at positioning yourself across the web, the better this new loop marketing is going to work out for you in the long run.
Yeah, I think the most important part is not only is it looking at all of that content, it's deciding whether you are recommendable. And we talked about that in last week's podcast. We went long talking about that and why it was so important. But the reality is that is the game. That's the gatekeeper. And some people are like, I know that's unfair. Why would that work that way? The reality is it has leveled the playing field, right? So the funnel didn't die, okay? Our control over it did. The buyer can enter anywhere in the funnel. They can jump stages. They can go into deep research. They can come back through a referral from a colleague. They can listen to one of your podcasts. They could have read your reviews. They could ask another AI question, right? They could actually visit your website. Yes, they still visit your websites and even book a normal call, right? Or a Zoom meeting. But they do all of this maybe at lunch. Hopefully not on your employer's time, Rebecca. So let's make sure we say this. Yeah, they're doing all this at lunch now. And I think that is the big deal. And this kind of process is happening whether you like it or not. What I like, though, is we say our control over it did die. But I think the opportunity is you have more control over being recommended or whether you should be recommended than ever. The old days, it was if you were not NerdWallet, CNBC, you're never going to be on a search result, right? Now, you could be an expert at QSBS stock and be recommended by ChatGPT to thousands and thousands of prospects that you never could have connected before. That's purely because you're seeding, you're playing the game, and you're giving the right signals to tools like ChatGPT. So kind of explain a little bit of this invisible buyer journey.
Yeah, so you may no longer see the buyer progressing, which can be scary. Back in the old days when we had like a click funnel set up, for example, I remember, going in and we would look at, okay, how many people clicked through here? Who were they? Because people would create profiles. They would give up their information. We could see who had downloaded the ebook, who had taken advantage of the offer, who had clicked on the landing page, where they had clicked on the landing page, right? We had all of that data. Now you don't have that data, which can feel like you're out of control. It can kind of feel like you're just spinning out in space, right? But that's not necessarily the case. So even though you don't see it, you're going to see the results of it. So the first signal you get might be that someone books a consultation because ChatGPT recommended you. Another signal might be that you created an Instagram reel and all of a sudden you have messages coming into your DMs or people are commenting on that reel because it's getting pushed to the right audience that fits your target demographic. You may see someone, comment on a blog that you wrote or reshare something that you posted on social media. All of these things are signals that the marketing loop is working and that you're being referred by these AI engines. However, there is an unfortunate second possibility, and that's that you never get a signal at all. And that would be because someone else was better positioned and they won the recommendation. And like Lee alluded to earlier, in this day and age, people aren't necessarily scrolling 2 or 3 pages of Google. There's not really a lot of hope that they're going to find you if they're using ChatGPT and you're not the recommended firm. People typically just go with the recommended firm. That's the way psychology is working with AI search. So there's a ton of opportunity here, but there's also a chance that if you're not well positioned, you could really miss out.
Well, I'm going to say that let's just go to the biggest news of the day. You don't need an $8,000 HubSpot, consultant on top of your $3,000 a month subscription to create a funnel. And that is kind of, what we're trying to communicate here today. So let's talk about here, I think the scariest new marketing problem. I think for a lot of times people don't understand this. For years, we worried, what if someone visits a website and doesn't convert? Obviously that's still important. We want to look at those metrics and decide why they're not converting. Usually that's because you do not have a narrative and you have a cookie cutter website with the same exact copy as everyone else. You're not approaching your prospect with their pain points and proof that you know how to solve that, right? But the reality is today, what if they never reach your website at all? That doesn't mean the website's not working because your website is pushing, maybe the word isn't pushing the content. ChatGPT is coming to your website and finding the content and finding the story and building that profile, that narrative about you, right? So, so now they may not go to your website and they may not convert because the CTA was bad, for example. Maybe your contact form had too many fields. I'm just going through all the nonsense that we used to A/B test, right? Maybe, your follow-up was slow and they didn't convert. You lost them before you even knew there was someone to lose, right? Imagine somebody asked, hey, which tax and accounting firm near me specializes in dental practices and offers proactive tax planning? That is a very common question maybe someone's looking for, right? So maybe 5 firms could serve that prospect, but only 2 have enough visible evidence to actually demonstrate it. So those 2 have, let's say, a dental specific service page. Maybe they have FAQs. Maybe they've done podcasts. Maybe they've posted on LinkedIn. Maybe they've been on Reddit talking about their dental practice. They're like giving tips, okay? Maybe they have reviews from other dental practices that actually reinforce the experience of what they are saying on their website, right? They have clear team expertise. These are the people. They focus on the dental practices, right? Maybe podcast appearances, right? Or third-party mentions, right? So those 2 firms are understandable. They're provable. They make that shortlist on ChatGPT. And the other 3 firms, you might be the greatest CPA ever for dental practices. But guess what? You haven't shown that experience. You have not given the ChatGPT the tools, that context to say, hey, they work with 75 dental firms right now, right? Because your homepage says, we provide comprehensive tax and accounting services to individuals and businesses. Generic, right? Very generic. So how is a prospect to visit that website, or more importantly, ChatGPT know, oh, they work with 75 different dental practices, okay? So your expertise may exist in the real world, but if there's no digital evidence saying and shouting to ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity and Gemini, or your evidence doesn't support you work with dental firms, your expertise becomes harder to discover and, more importantly, harder to recommend. Their job is to make a very solid recommendation, right? So if it doesn't have that context, it's not going to mention you. So Rebecca.
Yes.
Why then? And I said, well, the first reaction is, well, I don't need a website anymore. Yes, you do, because it changes the job of your website. Yep. And let's talk about, kind of what those differences are and what happens now.
So your website just has a new job. It's moved on. It's gotten a new career. So historically, websites carried an absolutely massive emotional and educational burden. They needed to make people feel that they were in the right place, and then they also needed to educate people. So they would come to the website, read the homepage, read the service page, read some blogs, download something, maybe an ebook or a white paper. They would learn who you are. Then they would maybe contact you. Increasingly, the prospect may already arrive at your website knowing what you do now and who you are. Now, this doesn't make things like blogging less important. I say it all the time to clients now. Your blogs are now being written for ChatGPT, for Gemini, for Perplexity. They still need to be there, even if they're not getting massive readership, because that is how those AI systems know that they should be recommending you and what you do and what your specialties are.
Yeah, but they are, Rebecca, yes. Let's break in there. They are getting massive readership. They're just reading your blog within a context Correct. Of a conversation that's happening on ChatGPT.
Exactly.
So the content is there. Who wrote it and who the expert is associated with that. And that is the big win. And that, again, is the opportunity. You're actually getting more eyeballs and more, people that actually you want to attract versus kind of the compliance generalist shopper, by being differentiated.
Absolutely. That's really important. I'm glad you said that because sometimes people aren't seeing the traffic to that blog, right, from organic search anymore, and they get concerned. But yes, people are just finding you in a different way. They're reading you in a different way. You're getting recommended in a different way. But AI may have already explained what tax advisory is to someone. So they no longer necessarily need to find that out when they get to your website. So the point of the site is simply, okay, prove it. Everything they already know about you, your website now has to prove that that's who you really are. Is this firm really for someone like me? Do they understand my problem? Are they credible? Does their language match my needs? Do their clients reinforce the story? That's where reviews, social proof, those kinds of things really come into play. And then, is there a real person behind this company? That's important. People want to know they're working with someone real, someone authentic. That's where a great about the firm or about me page can come in. Add some personality. If you love dogs, don't be afraid to have a picture of you and your dog. If you love skydiving, don't be afraid to say it. If you love travel, don't be afraid to have a photo of you at some fabulous place you've visited.
How about Star Wars? Don't be
I was
afraid to
gonna
put
say,
it in the background of your.
oh, my blur just disappeared. So you can see all my fandom stuff. Yes, if you love Star Wars, say you love Star Wars. But yeah, all of these things are important. People increasingly want authentic interaction, not only with, influencers and people online, but with service providers. So it's very important to use your website to prove that you are who the internet thinks you are. So the most important question people are going to ask, though, is how do I take the next step? And that's where they're going to reach out and they're going to become more than a prospect. They're going to hopefully become a client. So your website is not becoming less important. Its job is simply changing. It increasingly needs to deliver two things: validation and action. So it needs to make people feel like everything they've learned about you is in fact true. And it needs to make it very easy for them to take that next step into becoming a client.
Yeah, and this is why, the narrative and showing personality is such a game changer for tax and accounting firms. And we pound it through. Obviously, that is our offering. But even though it's our offering, not all of our clients want to do that. They're like risk adverse. They're like, oh, if I say that, I narrow down who might call me. But the reality is there's a couple things that may happen here. So, and I'm going to give our CountingWorks as an example as well. But I'm also going to say kind of what may happen in the beginning of when you go all into optimizing for a tool like ChatGPT. So you may see a decrease in traffic because that's already happening anyway. So there's 0 clicks happening today. Gemini and Google AI results are answering questions inside at the top of the response now. So they're not going to the blue links anyway. So no matter what, your organic traffic actually can go down. We've seen the opposite. We've gone all in on creating really valuable content around what we call the growth opportunities for tax and accounting firms. So what do? We are the growth platform for tax and accounting firms. We create content now all around that. Every single talking point. And sometimes if you've listened to a bunch of our podcasts, yeah, we're repeating things because we believe in them and they work and it matters. And what we've found at our own website is actually a huge increase in traffic, even though we know we're being talked about or the content we're creating is in a lot of these 0 clicks. It's still generating a growth area in our content. But don't be alarmed if, oh no, my traffic's down, because that's the change. We don't have a bunch of blue links. People aren't going visiting 6 websites anymore, reading, going back and forth, right? They're having a one funnel conversation in ChatGPT, and hopefully your expertise, your voice, your firm is being recommended and talked about. So I don't want you to think it, like the old days, everyone thought about SEO and it's not working. I think you need to be very careful. So a lot of basic, what I'm going to call informational traffic, is getting absorbed by AI-powered answers and 0 click search. So what is their phone number? What is the address of my CPA? Or, what does a 1099 mean? Right? They're not necessarily ending up in an accountant's, what is the standard mileage rate? That's happening right now. Those answers are happening inside ChatGPT or inside Google, okay? So they're getting the answer now without visiting anybody's website. So that traffic disappearing may look scary, but ask yourself, what was that the person actually your next, I'm looking for a $10,000 advisory or $20,000 CFO advisory client? Probably not, right? So what you want is to create very high intent traffic. So creating content, if you're trying to go after advisory, monthly advisory, or if you're doing soft advisory, you're creating content around those soft advisory opportunities. And I call soft advisory things that are more like life events, selling a business, dealing social security planning, right? Student loan debt, right? Those are soft advisory versus someone who's a business who wants an outsourced kind of CFO. That's more of a traditional CAS type client, right? So, what you're looking for is who's looking for an advisor, who realizes I can benefit and have a better financial outcome if I work with a CPA or an EA, right? Who's researching these firms? Who's reaching out? Who's actually ready to solve a problem? And, think about, I'll just give an example. You had 5,000 website visits. Maybe you had 50 inquiries last year. And maybe out of that, only 10 were ideal clients. And you know what I'm talking about. How much time have you wasted with, unqualified price shoppers or whatever, people trying to get free advice? And I'll give you a comparison. Well, this year, because you've optimized for geo, maybe you have 3,500 visits or they're down. and maybe only 45 inquiries, but let's say 15 of them are ideal clients, right? So the traffic may have fallen, but your actual client acquisition, ideal client profile is increased, right? So my question to you is, what would you rather have? And I would say 99% of people would say, I'd want the second. I want the most qualified prospects possible, because I have now trained. This is the type of person I work with. This is what I charge. This is who I don't work with, right? And that's how you start monetizing relationships. So the scoreboard has to change. The question isn't, did traffic go up? The question is, did we create more of the right type of conversations? Are we getting that ideal client profile to, visit us and then obviously select us because we were recommended by ChatGPT? So this goes back into why content is so important. We've kind of hit this a little bit. Rebecca, you can kind of skim over this, but kind of just reiterate, you don't stop blogging because of 0 clicks. This is what's feeding ChatGPT.
Exactly. And we have hit on it a little bit. So for the sake of time, we won't get too deeply into this again. But that would be the worst takeaway from this conversation, to think that you need to stop blogging, that you need to stop posting content. It matters really more than ever. But we need to change the way we think about the job of content. Instead of asking, where in the funnel should this go? You should be asking, what question does this answer? Why does it matter? What should I do about this problem I'm having? Who is this service for? How much does it cost? What mistakes should I avoid? Why should I choose you? Who do you help? Do you have a niche? All of these things are questions that buyers need to have answered. But the buyer now chooses the order. Like Lee said, people jump around. There is no traditional funnel anymore. For most people. Most people are jumping around. They're maybe asking this question, then this question, then this question. If you're recommended for all of them as a firm that can help, there's a very good chance they're ultimately going to come to your website and convert. But you need to be answering those questions in your content so that these search systems understand, okay, X firm is who I need to be sending all of these people looking for help with this issue to. So that's kind of the role of content now, just very briefly. It has changed, but it's changed in a way that makes it much easier for you to position yourself well if you're willing to put in the legwork and actually create the content.
Yeah, I think the real message here is old marketing was a battle for blue links, right? It's for the stage, did I rank for this keyword? My 1, 2, or 3, otherwise you didn't get the clicks, right? How do we capture top of funnel traffic? And we develop content that takes them to that awareness, consideration, conversion, right? How do we get someone into our nurture sequence? So you're a battle of how many white papers can I get? And can I get 1,000 people in? Because I know only 1 or 2% become clients, right? And the new battle is increasingly, hey, when our ideal prospect asks an important question, are we part of the answer? And that's what's so great about this, is you really can control this if you are creating the right content, if you have the right 5-star reviews, if you are talking specifically to different verticals, niches, you're answering the questions they're asking all the time. And it's a completely different mindset, really. So that's why your entire digital footprint matters, right? It's not just your website anymore. It's your Google business profile. It's your TaxBuzz profile. It's all of your reviews. It's your FAQs. You're like, what is an FAQ? Frequently asked questions. They're little snippets. If you have the schema right and you're doing FAQ pages for, maybe you have an FAQ, 25 ways you can improve cash flow for your dental practice, and then have different questions that people might be asking. You give your expertise. Those snippets get picked up as context for ChatGPT. When someone asks that question, you're the expert that it talks about. Well, Lee Reams and Associates says this, or you wrote a blog article, right? Or you created a video on YouTube. Your directory listings, right? Your niche expertise. Are you on podcasts in the dental industry? We're just staying with this, right? Third-party mentions on Reddit, things like that. So, this all goes about your reputation, right? What does the internet think about you? Because again, if people aren't telling your story, it's not being amplified and it's not being listened to. Therefore, your buyer may never hear about you, okay? So what it does is all of this information, again, becomes evidence. And evidence makes your firm understandable. Evidence makes your firm credible. And more importantly, this evidence makes you recommendable. That is what this whole podcast is doing. So, what should firms actually be doing? I don't want to replace the funnel and some, we like to have acronyms, and Rebecca does. But, we've been doing we have a recommendation engine that we offered in our podcast last week, and it has a framework. But I think that we can break this down into something much more simple. So be present, meaning you're active on the internet. Okay. Your blog is consistent. You're active on social. Now back it up, be provable, have these case studies, have stories of success, right? Have these 5-star reviews. And then more importantly, be ready, right? So, can you actually be found where modern buyers research, right? So they're still using Google, but Google's now using AI answers, right? AI search. Your Google business profile still comes up really big here in the Google results. Blue links are gone or way down, but the Google profile is there. The Google answers are there, in professional directories, industry-specific directories, right? Going back, podcast reviews, et cetera. So you need to have this content in order to be evaluated. So if you're not present, guess what happens? And then that backs me into kind of Rebecca. Okay, so we're now there. We have the story. Hopefully you've developed a custom narrative that people will enjoy and it's connecting. But then how do you back that up by being provable?
Yeah. So this is where positioning is critical. So let's say someone asked, find me an accounting firm that specializes in dental practices, to continue with our example there. And your website just says, we provide comprehensive tax and accounting services. Well, that really tells them almost nothing. And it tells the search systems almost nothing as well. So if you really do specialize in dentists, you need to make it visible. That is how you prove that that's who you work with. Answer the questions, publish the expertise, get client reviews, use imagery that pertains to dental offices, right? Your hero section should say something like, we serve dental professionals in the Dallas area with expert tax services, or something to that effect. Don't just claim expertise and then not prove it on your website. Your expertise needs to be provable. Post blogs that relate to the dental industry. Get on podcasts where people are talking about but tax and accounting for dentists, where people are maybe talking about even just local small businesses. That could be great to align yourself with local small business organizations, right? And say, hey, this is what we do. We do taxes and accounting, and we specialize in dental firms, and we're here to help you get everything in order. You need to be out there in the world proving that the expertise you say you have is legitimate. So it's very important. It's not that hard to do, honestly. You just need to be willing to do the work and to get that information out there so that people and all of these search systems can find it.
Yeah. And then, okay, so you've done everything right. The people actually are coming to you, want to hire you. And then what do you have? Contact us with a form and you respond in 36 hours versus schedule a 20-minute tax strategy conversation. What do you think is going to convert? What shows you more ready, right? One is very vague, is the old days, takes time. The other one is a super high intent prospect getting exactly what they want. They can book directly with you. And what you're going to see over time is these agents are going to start booking the appointments. They're going to be able to see the availability. They're going to be able to submit information about the prospect, right? So the question is now, can they talk to a human quickly, right? Because AI isn't only getting better at helping people do this research, they're helping people go quicker to who should I hire and how quickly can I do it, right? What is their availability, right? Book me a consultation. So the distance between, and this is the whole topic that we're talking about, the distance between I have a problem to I have an appointment has gone from a 3-week process that we just talked about to literally a 5 to 10 minute conversation. So it keeps shrinking over time, and your path to action needs to shrink with it. So Rebecca, let's talk real quick, kind of like a 15-minute challenge, how you can test this yourself and kind of get an idea of how you're working today in this environment.
Yes. So you can do this week, 15 minutes. It doesn't have to take you very long at all. Write down the 5 most important questions that your ideal prospect asks before hiring a firm like yours. Not keywords, real questions. Keywords are not what they once were, right? We actually have conversations with our AI systems now, like that large prompt we mentioned at the beginning. That's how people are searching. So ask those exact questions of your AI assistant, whether it's GPT, Gemini, Claude, I don't care. Go ahead and open your system of choice or test it across several. Ask the questions and see what firms show up, what sources of information are referenced, what kinds of evidence seem to matter, and what's missing. Then ask yourself one very uncomfortable question, especially if you're not showing up. Would your firm survive this research process? If the answer is no, you have some work to do. If you're already being recommended, great. Keep doing what you're doing.
I laughed. You said conversations with your tools. You didn't see this, but in our dev meeting, we finally, I mean, it's not new. Claude is doing this in the coding side where you're literally talking to your assistant and talking to Claude, and Claude's talking back to you. We're very close to launching that in Max. And I still like dictating and then doing the traditional, but it wouldn't take me long to probably have a full conversation. And it feels like you're really have an assistant who also thinks about other things you may have not have thought of and really helps the conversation along. The reason I say this is you have tools like Alexa, Siri, all these things that is the technology that people are utilizing, and they're getting used to talking to AI, not in like a, hugely complex, airline tree, phone tree, but like a real conversational and thinking and responses that make sense and kind of lead the conversation. So super exciting what's happening. And as I thought it was interesting you're bringing up the conversation with these tools, because that's happening, and we're bringing it into, I don't know if we're bringing it in 2 weeks or 4 weeks, but we will have that in our ecosystem as well. And it really helps people that don't get it. They would probably help you create content around what we're talking about here much easier than trying to go at a blank slate and start prompting in questions. What context did I do? Instead, you could have this conversation, what we've been talking about with Max, for example, and Max can dial in. So what I think is important, what are the takeaways, right? You went through this, you decided, hey, did I show up right? Am I being talked about or recommended the way I want? And then if I'm not, or I want to help it seed more information, I'm like, wait a second, I do this and ChatGPT doesn't even know that I do. Go to your website, and you don't have to necessarily visit every word, but give yourself 30 seconds. And what you want to ask yourself is, who do I help? Who does this firm help, right? What am I really good at, right? Am I credible? What are clients saying about me? And what am I supposed to do next? And if you go through those 5 little questions and you realize, wait a second, I don't have those answers, I'm not flowing through, you have a great opportunity to improve things, right? And that's the great takeaway. For years, decades, we designed marketing around a funnel: awareness, consideration, decision. It was a long funnel. Buying cycles took a lot longer, right? And we tried to move buyers through the journey one at a time, and then they would drop out. And AI has changed that equation completely. It's completely upside down. So now we're very truncated, very quick. So human decision-making is still happening. It didn't disappear, but your prospects can now educate themselves. They can compare options. They can validate providers and make decisions at an extraordinary rate, very, very fast, right? And you're seeing people, this is also helping new businesses break into markets that were owned by a monopoly, or firm that never, they owned everything. They owned this area. But this is really big opportunity for you to go in there quickly, if you do it right, and jump in and interrupt that buyer journey and, basically push off that old legacy firm, for example, for yours, if you're telling the story right. So AI has not eliminated the buyer journey. I think we've shown the old way, now the new way. It put the buyer, your prospect journey on fast forward, right? So the prospect now can self-nurture. They control the pace, they control the questions, they control the conversation. Our control over the funnel is maybe dead, but our control over the narrative of what it's saying about us is more capable than ever, right? So what did we talk about? Be present, so show up when the machines and people are looking. Be provable. Make sure you have those 5-star reviews. Make sure you have that visible evidence to back up whatever story, whatever you're really good at, right? And then more importantly, be ready. Make sure that you make it easy, take the friction out of the buying process. And I think the biggest risk isn't necessarily losing someone after they visit your website. It's losing someone before they ever get there, right? So someone asks AI for the perfect firm. AI evaluates the evidence. Another firm makes the shortlist. You're not there. You lost before you were ever in the game, right? And you never even knew that prospect existed in the market. So I think that's really important. So that is the new tax and accounting marketing funnel. It has no funnel. So the buyer controls this journey now. And our job is to make sure your firm is ready whenever that journey happens. So I hope we've really resonated with you on this one and kind of explained it. This is why your narrative is so important. I think we've nailed it. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or visit our website at CountingWorksPro.com. We go into more detail of what a narrative is, why it's so important. Just go to our blog and our resources or listen to our other podcasts. We go all over this. So that wraps up this edition of the Growth Minded Accountant. Rebecca, is there any final thoughts you have, or we nailed this one?
I think we got it. I think we're good.
All right. Until next week, we're going to start pivoting here to some new things. We're going to throw some social media topics here in the next couple of weeks as well. So some really good content coming your way. So again, thank you for being a follower of the Growth Minded Accountant. Until next week.